We have a verdict in the Sean Diddy Combs criminal case after all of these weeks. And if you thought that was the only major decision of the day, you would be wrong. We're going to talk about what happened on this absolutely monumental day in court.
The moment the judge walked back into the courtroom, everything changed. The air was thick with tension. No one moved. No one even dared to whisper.
What is next for him, right? You got sentencing, civil suits, a lot to get into. So while Combs was acquitted of racketeering conspiracy and the sex trafficking charges that he was facing, he was convicted of transportation to engage in prostitution. Currently, sentencing is set for October 3rd. However, there is a hearing set for July 8th where the defense will be arguing for the sentencing date to be expedited, to happen sooner. Obviously, they want that, considering Combs was also denied bail yet again, despite arguments from his legal counsel after the verdict that he should be released on bond. It didn't happen. They want to make sure this happens as quickly as possible. But what will he be sentenced to, really? That's the question. And also, will the government seize his assets? What about all of those civil lawsuits that he faces? Again, a lot of questions, a lot to get into. So for all of this, let me bring on former sex crimes prosecutor and criminal defense attorney, the great Matt Murphy is with us. Matt, good to see you.
Happy to be here, as always.
Got to ask you your reaction to the verdict. Is it what you expected?
Well, hearkening back to, I don't know, we were talking about this, you and I, a couple of months ago, and I gotta say, whether it's fun to be right or not in a case like this, we were both right. This was never a good fit for Rico for a lot of different reasons. And the consent element regarding the sex trafficking was always problematic. And I thought the prosecution here did a good job presenting their case. They did a good job presenting their theory. But when you match in a trial context, when you match like professorial and kind of plotting, which is the way a lot of government lawyers are, versus dynamic and engaging and that personality of the defense, it's always a mismatch. You're always up against it. And the Mann Act, like we talked about, I thought he was going down on that after like the second day of testimony. The problem is for the prosecution, the Mann Act is a very old law, and it was essentially legislative morality from about 100 years ago, where it was transporting prostitutes across state lines. The intent may have been good. It was essentially a very early version of sex trafficking, but it was really more an attempt to stop prostitution, which is, as we know, never going to happen. So the almost every lonely guy in New York City who's going through a divorce, who is having a problem in the dating pool, who has some sex worker drive over from New Jersey, if he buys her Uber or his Uber, theoretically, that's a violation of the Mann Act. So that is it's not the same type of crime. There's no mandatory minimum under federal law. The judge
Yeah,
does
we're going
not
to talk
have
about that.
to. Right. They don't have to. Now, it carries up to 10 years per event. So he faces up to 20 years. The prosecution, I think, is asking for 46 months or something like that. They're asking for far less than that.
If the case was, if they had called, let's say, Christina Courtroom, okay, this chief of staff who had been mentioned, I think, by almost every witness, and she said, hey, listen, there was a criminal enterprise, okay? We were all a part of it. Everybody knew what the job description was. My job was to do this. His job was to do this. You think they would have gotten racketeering? If they didn't include Jane, who was arguably the more problematic testimony, I mean, Sean Combs still paying her rent, messages that she was setting up a lot of these sexual encounters. Cassie had messages too that were problematic that showed, if we're talking about whether she was a willing participant or not. But if you focus just on Cassie.
Diddy sat frozen, eyes locked on the bench, waiting for the words he feared the most. The bail hearing had ended. The decision was final. And everyone knew it wouldn't go his way. The judge's voice cut through the silence like a blade. After careful consideration of the facts presented, the testimonies provided, and the overwhelming nature of the evidence, the court has determined that bail will be denied. The room exploded, not in sound, but in shock. Gasps, murmurs, the scrape of chairs. Diddy's attorneys leaned in, frantically flipping through notes, whispering strategies. But Diddy? He didn't blink. His jaw locked tight, his knuckles white against the defense table. Then came the real blow. Sentencing will proceed in 48 hours. This court is preparing for final judgment. That's when Diddy broke. He stood up fast. Too fast. His chair toppled behind him. He slammed both hands on the table. You can't do this. You think you've got the truth? You've got stories, lies. Security rushed forward.
Sex trafficking of Jane, not guilty. Transportation to engage in prostitution, Cassie, guilty. Transportation to engage in prostitution, Jane, guilty. That was the historic verdict out of the Sean Diddy Combs criminal court today. A split verdict after almost 13 hours of deliberations and weeks of testimony and evidence and arguments. The 12 jurors acquitted Sean Combs of the more severe charges, the ones that carried the stiffest prison sentence, potentially 15 years to life in prison, but convicted him of the Mann Act charges, which, by the way, carry up to 10 years in prison each, although I will tell you in a filing today from the government, it appears the sentencing range they're looking for is 51 to 63 months, so 4 to 5 years. However, there is no mandatory minimum. So would the judge go lower? We'll talk about what the defense is asking for too. And also, whatever the sentences are, would he combine the sentences consecutively, one after another? Maybe, maybe not. A lot of questions, but I'll tell you what, you would think that the verdict would be just the only big part of today. You would think that's the only major decision. Not the case, because we got to talk about what happened later on in the day, the bail hearing. Right after the verdict, it was a question of should Sean Combs be granted release while awaiting sentencing, which the judge set today, by the way. Sort of set the sentencing date. I'll talk more about that as well. But I mean, let's talk about Sean Combs. He's been locked up since September 2024. He's been denied bail at each turn. There was a change of circumstances here. He had just been acquitted of 3 of the charges. So could he make bail? We're going to talk about it. All right, so to discuss the hearing and more, let me bring on once again, hopefully not for the last time, but we're at basically the end of this case until sentencing. Joined once again by long crimes in court reporter Elizabeth Milner. Great to see you. First of all, your reaction to the verdict. Is this what you expected? Because let's really briefly explain what happened yesterday. That, you know, we thought it kind of gave us a preview into what would happen today. Not necessarily so.
Yeah, I was not going to lie, Jesse, a little surprised by the verdict in that I really kind of thought there was a really strong case for count 2, that obviously being sex trafficking as it relates to Cassie Ventura. And that was only because of the questions that the jury was asking when they were bringing some notes back. And that was kind of in relation to what had happened at specific instances that the government point out were allegations of sex trafficking. So I thought because of the tone that was inside the courtroom, the way the family was getting a little bit emotional sitting inside the gallery, even Diddy's demeanor, for the most part, we've seen him kind of really keep up his spirits. But yesterday was really a time where we kind of saw, I think, the weight weighing in on him, that it's possible a conviction on some of the more serious charges were going to happen. And so when the jury came back not guilty on count 1, 2, and 4, you know, I was a little surprised, especially to count 2, but, you know, I do respect the jury's decision. They spent a lot of time listening to this case, listening to all the testimony, listening to all the evidence, and that was the verdict that they had rendered.
Yeah, I wasn't surprised that they found him guilty of transportation to engage in prostitution. We have been saying since for weeks on this show that felt like a straightforward path to conviction. Wasn't surprised, not guilty.
His lawyers tried to grab him. The judge remained unmoved. Mr. Combs, you will remain silent or be removed. But Diddy wasn't listening. His voice climbed, desperate, shaking. They're coming after me. This is bigger than me. You're playing right into it. The judge ordered the marshals to restrain him. And still, he fought. Not with violence, but with the look in his eyes. Like a man who saw the walls close in and knew this wasn't just the end of a trial. It was the end of everything. The courtroom was cleared. Outside, reporters went into a frenzy. Headlines lit up. Diddy denied bail. Sentencing imminent. Judge prepares final judgment. Behind closed doors, insiders revealed the mood in chambers was somber. The judge had reviewed every detail, every sealed document, every video clip that hadn't yet gone public. The abuse, the manipulation, the control, and the calculated system that allowed it all to exist. He wasn't just denying bail, he was setting the tone for what came next. In the holding area, Diddy sat alone. No words, no outbursts, just silence. For the first time in his life, the man who built an empire on power, noise, and control had none. He was no longer Sean Combs, the mogul. He was inmate number pending. And the clock was ticking. When court reconvened briefly, the prosecution made one thing clear. Your Honor, we ask that the final sentence reflect the totality of harm caused.
It's based on voter rules. So it's people who are conscientious enough to actually vote, and you tend to get a more serious class of juror
Right.
in federal court, which I think is interesting. So to answer your question, it's something that we could kick around for
Sure,
years.
sure.
But I think the fundamental problem here is that it was always kind of a misfit for a RICO theory. Just
I
like
get
the
it.
sex trafficking requires fraud, force, or coercion, right? So that essentially is the same elements of rape. So you essentially, it's transporting somebody under
Yep,
circumstances that equate to rape.
yep.
Is something forceful, something fearful. That it just doesn't fit very well here,
I
especially
get
when
it.
you're talking about all these
Yeah.
people they're orbiting him. They're all trying to advance their own career. And when the defense attorney got up and said, um, Cassie got $30 million as a result of her settlement, right? And that
Yeah.
was a big move.
Yeah, I wasn't sold for that personally, because I was like, the prosecution came back and be like, she already settled. What's her incentive to come here and lie? What's her incentive to be a part of this? And that for me, but I think the messages, the conduct that arguably contradicts someone being a victim, and I know there's complicated factors between an abuser and a victim, the trauma. I get it. I totally understand it, but I wonder if that's what saddled the jury. Okay, I want to move past the verdict because now we have to talk about what's happening next. First thing, when the sentencing hearing is going to happen. So they have this hearing next week about whether to expedite the sentencing, happening before October 3rd. If both sides agree, great. If they don't, what is a compelling legal argument for the defense to say, we want this sentencing to happen much sooner?
Well, I mean, we know that behind the scenes, what they want, of course, is they expect a chance that he's going to be released. So that's their big motivating factor, of course. Whether the court abides by that, I mean, it is a substantial change in circumstance. He was acquitted of all of these serious charges, right?
But he was
Like
just denied bail. He was denied bail again.
he was denied bail again, and I actually learned that on your segment yesterday afternoon as I was sort of
Yeah, yeah.
doing my preparation for this. But the we have to remember that one of the things that he got in trouble for, that Diddy got in trouble for in jail, was using other inmates' calling number. Remember that? So he was calling witnesses in the case from jail using other inmates. That was a direct affront to that judge. That was remember, we had all those attempts at bail that were denied at the very beginning of the case, one after another after another. This judge, and it's the same judge who's going to sentence him, denied that over and over again. And you and I, again, in another conversation we had on your show, we both said he is screwed now, that he's got no chance because he's violating the rules of the court while in jail. So if he's disobeying the rules of the jail and the directive of the court while he's in custody, how can he be expected to actually follow the terms of a bail agreement when he's out of custody?
Right, right.
And I think that chicken is coming home to roost again. I mean, I think that's what happened yesterday afternoon. That any judge who has a criminal defendant who behaves like that is an affront to the court itself. It's disrespectful to the
Sure.
court, and it's almost like he couldn't get out.
Not just in scale, but in the length of time these actions were allowed to go unchecked. The judge nodded. He had already decided, but he wasn't ready to say it yet. Not until sentencing day. And when that day comes, the world will be watching. Because the fall of an empire doesn't end with handcuffs. It ends with a number. And Diddy was about to hear his. Over the next 24 hours, more damning revelations made their way into the case file. Confidential financial records, detailing off-the-books payouts. Hotel surveillance logs that had been buried years ago. Anonymous messages from former insiders. Everything was pouring in. The prosecutors were stacking the final bricks into a wall Diddy could no longer climb. His team made one last plea for leniency. They argued his contributions to the music industry, the jobs he created, the millions donated to charity. But the judge wasn't swayed. That legacy was tainted now. Nothing changed what had already come to light. The courtroom sketches from the previous session went viral. Diddy's face, gaunt, unrecognizable, almost ghost-like. The mogul who once commanded stages, boardrooms, and red carpets now reduced to a man in a wrinkled jumpsuit, staring down the weight of justice. Outside the courthouse, protesters stood with signs demanding accountability. Survivors gave interviews. Journalists dissected every angle of the case.
And just some more reasons, too. The judge decided that the defendant will remain behind bars pending his sentencing.
And yeah, I looked at the government's letter, and they talked about violence, they talked about drug use, they talked about the abuse of Cassie, that you have multiple victims in this case, that he used the staff to carry out these transportation to engage in prostitution crimes, that he tried to obstruct justice with respect to these crimes, that under the Bail Reformed Act, they argued this was a crime of violence, that he poses a serious risk of flight, a danger to the community. So clearly it seems that the judge was persuaded by that. The judge did mention something really, really interesting, because somebody would listen to this and say, oh my gosh, he's going to throw the book at him. He actually said the court takes no position on what it will consider its sentencing, nor what sentence it will impose. However, we kind of got a little bit of a preview of what a potential sentence could be, right? We kind of got an idea of what the defense is advocating and what the government is advocating.
Yeah, so what the defense was kind of advocating for was anywhere between the guidelines of 21 to 27 months behind bars. So if you think about Sean Combs and his time that he served, he's nearly at a year. So if the judge were to go for the defense's route, he could be out within a year. Whereas the government was like, okay, no, under the guidelines, it's really 51 to 61 months. So from the government's point of view, Jesse, it seems like there is kind of a disagreement as to how long the defendant should serve as far as his time goes, but either way, he'll still have time served. And so depending on whether it's 51 to 61 months or like the defense wants 21 to 27 months, it'll ultimately be up to the judge to make that decision.
And didn't the prosecutor say something about a pre-sentencing investigation report? And just to give everybody an idea about what that is, that you got to give the judge as much information as possible before sentencing, and particularly where there's a sentence that's based a lot on the judge's discretion. And that usually...
The entire world was watching a titan fall in real time. When Diddy was brought into the courtroom the following day, the atmosphere was even heavier. No cameras, no electronics, just silence. The judge entered. All rise. Diddy remained standing, his eyes locked on the bench. Everyone knew this was the moment. Mr. Combs, the judge began, the court has considered the breadth and scale of the allegations, the irrefutable evidence, and your direct involvement in a systemic pattern of abuse, intimidation, and control. This court believes your actions were not only criminal, but corrosive to the culture of protection that should have been afforded to your victims. Diddy's lip trembled. You used your status to shield yourself, to insulate wrongdoing behind power and wealth. And for that, you must now face the full measure of accountability. There was no sound, not even breathing. Therefore, the court sentences you to... He paused. 25 years in federal prison. Diddy collapsed into his chair. Gasps filled the room. His attorney whispered something, but Diddy wasn't listening. His gaze was fixed ahead, unblinking. The judge continued. You will be remanded to custody immediately. You will have no access to personal business affairs. You will be evaluated for placement in a facility commensurate with the severity of the charges. The marshals stepped forward. The man who once walked through flashing cameras with untouchable swagger now walked in shackles. No words, no entourage, just silence. And just like that, the curtain fell. What began as a celebrity scandal had ended in a prison sentence. An entire era was closed. And the message rang loud across the nation. No one is above the law. Not even Diddy. In the hours that followed, reactions flooded the internet. Some called it justice. Others called it betrayal. But what couldn't be denied was the impact. This wasn't just about one man. It was about a system, a culture, a legacy built on silence and intimidation finally being held to account. As the prison van pulled away from the courthouse, Diddy sat in the back, staring out at the world he no longer controlled. His silence spoke volumes. He had lost everything. His freedom, his empire, his name. And for the first time, the world didn't just watch him fall. They watched him vanish.